Okay, so I'm going to do a deck tech, well, secondary deck tech, and how to actually play Black-Red Reanimator. So you have your targets, which are Gristlebrand. Here I'll be moving stuff over to this side of the screen in a minute. So you have Gristlebrand, we have Sidespell Tyrant, we have Chancellor of the Annex, we have Elishnorn, we have Sire of Insanity. Okay, I'll go through each of these and their merits and whatnot. So the goal of this deck is to get one of them onto the battlefield on basically turn 1. I'm also going to go through the cards you have to watch out for. So there's a couple different ways to do this. You have Lotus Petal, which you sacrifice it, add 1 mana colored mana pool, play as a mana source, which means it's just mana, and it costs 0 as an artifact. So this is a ramp spell. This lets you play way less lands in your deck. You only need like 1 land to go off, if that. Okay. So the other one we have is also Simian Spirit Guide. So Simian Spirit Guide, you remove him from your hand, from the game, and you add a red mana to your mana pool. So this allows you to do a turn 1 Faithless Looting without actually using your land. He has a lot of value to him. Also, he pays for days, which we'll get into in a little bit as well. So you have 7 total of these ramp spells, plus you have your lands. So you have your fetches, which are your Polluted Deltas and your Bloodstained Mires. You pay a life, you sacrifice it, and you search your library for a swamp or a mountain. So either one of those will find every single land that you can play, which will be one Scrubland, which is used for the sideboard of Wear Tear. Let's see, I've got these all kind of moved around. We have the Bayou, which is there for the sideboard Reverent Silences. For those, and there are specific reasons I'm getting to each of them. And we have the Badlands, which are the ones you're going to want to use the most. And we have your basic swamps. So you can fetch up any of these with those fetch lands. We can move these back over. So you have a couple ways to put things into your graveyard. You have your Faithless Looting, which is pay 1 red, draw 2 cards, and discard 2 cards. So the whole goal is you draw something and you just put your creature into your graveyard. Be able to reanimate it, and you can cast it later in the game if you have enough mana. Is for 3 mana, for 1 red and 2 colorless. You're going to flashback where you exile this card and you repeat the spell itself. So you can do it later in the game. You also have 4 Entombs. Whoops. And Entomb says you pay a black. It's an instant, so you can do it at the end of their turn on turn 1, so you can see what they're going to do. You search your library for any card, period, and put it into your graveyard, and then you shuffle your library. So this is a really nice way to go if you just go turn 1, fetch land or land, pass turn, because you want to see what they're going to do. If you don't have a reanimation spell ready to go, because you don't have the extra ramp spells, then you can just put it into the graveyard, and then wait for your next turn, play your second land, and then animate Dead or Exhume, or you can reanimate to pay for days, which we'll get into again. So these are the really quick ways to get things into your graveyard. The other ways you have are a little bit less conventional. You have Unmask, which you may discard, or you may remove a black card here from the game. You can exile a black card instead of paying for Unmask, and you can target yourself or your opponent. If you already have the turn 1 reanimation, so if you have, land, Lotus Petal, Entomb, Reanimate, or Faithless Looting, Reanimate, or a Dark Ritual that we'll get into, and you can do those multiple things, then I unmask my opponent first thing, because you want to take away any of their counter spells or any of their graveyard interaction they might have, because there are things you can play on turn 0 or on turn 1 without paying any mana. So you can you can interact with them before they can stop you from doing what you're trying to do. You also have Thoughtseize, which is, you're going to do the same thing, but it costs some mana to do this one. And you choose any card in their hand that's a non-land, and then you lose 2 life for casting it. It costs 1 mana. Another way is, I mentioned Dark Ritual. So Dark Ritual is an instant that adds 3 black mana to your mana pool. This is essentially the same thing as tapping 3 swamps. Right? For one swamp you get 3 black mana, so it pays for it refreshes itself and then gives you 2 additional. This is some of your most broken first turns, because you can do an Exhume, Reanimate, or I'm sorry, an Entomb, Exhume. You can do Entomb, a discard spell, and Reanimate. You have a wide variety of things that this allows you to give access to. So Dark Ritual is very, very powerful, and one of your best cards in your hand. You have Exhume, which each player chooses a creature card from his or her graveyard and puts that card into play. So if they don't have any creatures, they don't get anything back, and you get yours. So it's just a free way to get your stuff back, because Reanimate costs you life based on the converted mana cost, and the CMC of stuff we're playing is pretty high. So that's pretty much that for how to get things into your graveyard. We do play main board power class, and this deals with so most of the creatures in Legacy have very low toughness. 2 and 1 is the average. Some will have 3 depending on what you're playing, but 2 is the average. So we get into the creatures and the merits of each one of them. So Gristlebrand is usually your primary target of 7/7 flying lifelinker for 8. And you pay 7 and draw 7. So he does a lot of work, but he's also not your prime. Sometimes he's not the best thing to go after. One of my other favorite turn 1 targets is the Chancellor of the Annex, because he just stifles your opponents from doing anything. He slows them down by a lot, because they have to pay extra mana to cast any of their spells. He also has a pre-game effect where you reveal him from your opening hand before the game actually starts. After both players decided to keep their hand, then you would say, okay, I have pre-game effects, you show him or her it, and their first spell is now countered unless they pay an additional 1. It's a flying 5/6, so it's pretty good. We have Elish Norn, who is a primary target because of the fact that, again, your opponent's creatures are usually 2 to 1 toughness, so it just kills them on the board, and anything that over that size, it diminishes their power and toughness by 2, so it makes your stuff bigger. So she's a very, very powerful card, and definitely one of the top picks for Reanimation. The next one is going to be Tidespell Tyrant. This gets, if they have things like Ensnaring Bridge, which I did not pull up and I will, you can bounce it back to their hand by playing a spell. By playing a spell is anything but a land in your deck. So if you play a Lotus Petal, I guess a land and Simian Spirit Guide for the mana ability. But every other card is considered a spell. So whenever you play a spell, you return target permanent to its owner hand. That includes you can bounce their lands, you can bounce their creatures, you can bounce their artifacts, their enchantments, their planeswalkers, whatever. Very, very powerful, and it's a 5/5 flyer. And the last one is Siren Insanity, who is high risk, high reward. He does a lot of work if you're not playing against mono white, specifically because they can Source of Plowshares him, or anything that plays white. Source of Plowshares wrecks him pretty bad. But if their spells require more than just 1 mana to kill him, then nobody you get 1 card a hand, or 1 card a turn, and then you discard that card if you don't use it. So he makes them build up, and he allows you to keep going, because you also have put him into play. You probably have a land, you've discarded the creatures, then you can reanimate them out of the graveyard if you need to. So those are your targets. We have one more out of the sideboard, which is Iona, which is the one where you choose a color, and as it enters the battlefield, you choose a color, and your opponents can't cast spells of that color. So that's pretty cool, and it stops a lot of different games from going crazy. So if we look at the things that you're going to have to worry about, regarding things you need to play around, we have the prime thing here you're going to have to deal with is Deathrite Shaman. So he should be a planeswalker for all rights. He's a creature, and for a green, he exiles a creature card from a graveyard, and then they gain 2 life. So he can eat your planeswalker. He can eat your creatures out of the graveyard before you're able to reanimate them, or once you target them, he can respawn, or they can respawn, and remove that creature from the graveyard, and your spell fizzles, and you have nothing to bring back. So yeah, this card is very, very powerful against us. Another one is usually out of the sideboards, and that's Rest in Peace. When it enters the battlefield, you exile all cards from all graveyards, and then if anything we put into the graveyard, you exile it instead, so there is no graveyards, which means you can't reanimate anything. And Rest in Peace is one of the reasons that we play Reverent Silence and Wear Tear. And I'll get more into how those work in a minute. I'm just kind of going through these. Leyline of the Void is another prime suspect, so they can play it for free if it's in their opening hand, much like our Chancellor of the Annex. They say, hey, I have pregame effects, and they just put it onto the battlefield, and you cannot interact with it outside of your sideboard. We have no way to well, I guess you have the Tidespell Tyrant. You could bounce it if you're able to get but you have zero way of getting Tidespell Tyrant onto the battlefield main board. So basically, they put it into play, and then if a card we put into an opponent's graveyard from anywhere, it's exiled instead. Same as Rest in Peace, there's just no graveyard for you, but that person still has their graveyard to operate out of. The next one is Surgical Extraction. So this one can be paid with Phyrexian Black Mana, which means they can either pay a black mana or 2 life. It's an instant, so they can after you put something in the graveyard, they can respawn and say, hey, by the way, I'm going to do this. They choose a card in a graveyard that is not a basic land. They search its owner's graveyard, hand, and library for any number of the cards with the same name, and they exile them. So if you put Gristlebrand into your battlefield, into your graveyard, and they surgically extract it, they take all of your Gristlebrands. You have no more in your deck. Same thing with Chancellor, same things with any of your other cards. They remove everything with the same name as that card from your library, or from your deck. If it's already on the battlefield, they can't touch it. But if it's in your hand, graveyard, or library, it gets removed from the game. Another one is Tormod's Crypt, and this is seen far less than the rest, but I wanted to at least mention it. They can sacrifice it and exile all cards from a target player's library. There's also Nihil Spellbomb, which does the exact same thing, but they can also then spend a black and draw a card off of it, and it costs 1 to put into play instead of 0. These are things you'll see out of Burn, some of the other decks where they don't have a whole lot of color interaction. So Nihil Spellbomb and Tormod's Crypt are the same thing, we'll say. Container Priest is another fun one out of the sideboards. If a non-token creature would enter the battlefield, if it wasn't cast, you exile it instead. So if you reanimate it, it is not cast, you are cheating it into the battlefield. If you show and tell it, if you sneak attack it, any of our ways of getting things onto the battlefield, this card will exile it, it will not enter the battlefield under your control. It's a very powerful card. We have Pyroclasmus for it, we have Massacre for it. We need to get this card off the battlefield as soon as possible. The good thing is it is 2 mana, but they can flash it in, which means they can cast it at any time they can cast an instant. So at the end of your turn, in response to casting Reanimate, they can put this card into the battlefield, as long as they have the requisite mana or a Aether Vial, which is a card that Death and Taxes runs. Okay. So the next one is Scavenging Ooze. This card is much like Deathrite Shaman. It's a 2 mana 2/2, but you exile it. They pay a green, exile a card from a graveyard. If it was a creature, then Scavenging Ooze gets +1/+1 counter, and the controller gains a life of the control of the Scavenging Ooze. So they can pick away at your graveyard. They can pick away certain cards and grow the Scavenging Ooze to attack back. I have no idea where the Scavenging Ooze just went. Okay. And the last one I'll mention, it's there, is Very Macabre. We actually play 2 of these. This is for the other reanimation decks. So you discard this out of your hand for free. It doesn't cost any mana, and it's an instant ability that they can't counterspell. Right? There's a few things they can stop, but those really aren't played. And you exile up to 2 cards in graveyards. So you can pick 2 of their cards from their graveyard. to make sure that they can't, they can't reanimate their stuff, but also if they try to reanimate your spell, or if you go up against another reanimate deck and they cast Exhume, you can discard this and you get your creature back and you can take away one of theirs. It also, if they try to surgically extract you, if you know they have that, you can bring in Fairy Macabre and you can protect your creature by exiling that one instead of losing everything, and you still get a creature in the graveyard. Granted, it's only a 2/2 flyer. Okay, so other cards you have to work about are Daze and Force of Will. These are counter spells that are most prevalent outside of the normal counter spell, because these ones can be basically free. So Daze, they can return an island they control to their owner's hand. And so if they have a volcanic island or any land that has island on it, they can return it to their hand and cast a spell for free, basically. And then they counterspell unless its controller pays 1. So if you're going to play Lotus Petal and they've already have a land on the battlefield, and you have a land in your hand, make sure you play the land first and then the Lotus Petal. That way, if they try to daze the petal, you can still pay for it and you can progress yourself. You can also use the Simian Spirit Guide to pay for the daze. So by exiling from your hand, it can be a surprise payment. They can't stop. Okay, the other one is Force of Will, where they may pay a life and exile a blue card from their hand rather than pay its mana cost, which is 5, and it just counters a spell. There is no paying for it, there is no way around it, they just counter the spell. So these are the cards you have to concern yourself with, especially since we're basically playing a combo deck. Moving on to our sideboard, we have a Pithing Needle. So this is if they bring in the Deathrite Shaman, or the Tormod's Crypt, or the Scavenging Ooze. You can name that card and they can't activate those abilities, so they can't interact with you. It can also be done to name planeswalkers or their fetch lands. There's a variety of things. Crocus is a land, that's one that I didn't put in, and I'll show you what that is here in a second. Crocus only affects your Gristlebrand and your Elesh Norn. So it doesn't hit, and it hits your Iona as well, I'm sorry, because it bounces, it's a land that you can tap it to return target legendary creature to its owner's hand. So if you reanimate a Gristlebrand and they play a Crocus, then they can just tap the Crocus, put the Gristlebrand back in your hand. So Pithing Needle gets you around a lot of different options. We do only play one of it. Before the GP, this might go up to a 2 of, I'm not sure yet. Okay, we have Iona, which I mentioned. It's another reanimation target. Okay, so Reverent Silence. This is why we play the Bayou. So that Bayou counts as both a swamp and a forest, as the first line reads. So Reverent Silence says if you control a forest, you may have each other player gain 6 life instead of paying Reverent Silence's mana cost. Destroy all enchantments. So the way this is really good is if they go into a turn 0 Leyline of the Void, or they land a Rest in Peace against you, you can play the spell, you can use one of your fetch lands, fetch up your Bayou, and then cast this card for free, without having to spend any mana on it, and then move on from there to keep progressing your board state. So Reverent Silence is very good for that asset. Alright, Massacre functions the same way as Reverent Silence does. If an opponent controls a plains, which is what this is mainly here for just Death and Taxes, which is a deck that I will that I play a lot of, and I have some videos for it. If they control a plains and you control a swamp, you may cast Massacre without paying its mana cost. So you basically don't spend 4 mana on it. You just put it on. You just cast it, and all creatures get -2/-2, which basically kills all but maybe 2 different creatures in Death and Taxes, possibly up to 3. So it's a really good card to have against them. It's -2/-2, so it's not damage, so they can't use like Mother of Runes to protect it. So Massacre's 1. Pyroclasm just deals 2 damage to each creature. So it's different than Massacre because that damage can be prevented, where the -2/-2 cannot be prevented. But this hits everything. They don't have to have a plains in play. You just spend 2 mana and you can wipe the board of all the small creatures. This notably kills Deathrite Shaman as it is a 1/2. Okay, we mentioned the Fairy Macabres. We already covered that card. The Wear Tears. So for 1 white, you can destroy enchantment. For a red and a colorless, you can destroy an artifact. And for a red, a white, and a colorless, you can cast both sides of it and blow up an artifact and an enchantment. But that costs 3 mana to do. So this is why the Scrub land is in the deck, because the Scrub land taps for white. Okay, Show and Tell. lets you put, each player may put an artifact, creature, enchantment, or land from their hand into the battlefield. This is why we have a volcanic island on our sideboard, because that is our only source of blue. I was playing an Underground Sea as well. I cut that for the Pithing Needle. The volcanic is, I think, better because you're usually bringing in show and tell and sneak attack at the same time, so it gives you the red and the blue, and we also don't have a whole lot of red sources for the sneak attack, so it was more valuable where we have a bunch of black sources. So it's just 3 mana sorcery. You cast it. If it resolves, then you put your cards face down, or you put your card that you're putting into play face down. Your opponent does the same thing. You reveal them, and they just go into the battlefield. Sneak attack is an enchantment that costs 4. You can pay a red, choose a creature card from your hand, put it onto the battlefield. It's unaffected by summoning sectors, means it has haste, and then you sacrifice at the end of turn. This is why we have another red source in our sideboard as well with the volcanic. So that is a sideboard. Those are the cards you have to watch out for. Caracas, I can bring that up real fast. So this is Caracas. It adds a white, or you return target legendary creature to its owner's hand. It's very good. But it only gets against 4 of our creatures, 3 of our creatures total. So 5 total creatures, but 3 different creatures. Right. So 5 total cards, 3 different creatures. That's one you have to be wary of. And you can Pithing Needle it, but that's the only interaction we have. You just go find a non-legendary creature and make them not use their Caracas on it. So, Collective Brutality is another way you can put things into the graveyard, bouncing back over to the main board here. You can escalate it by paying a black and a colorless. You can discard card to choose the additional modes. I can't really scroll over them. So the first mode, you're usually going to go, like if you go Dark Ritual, like land, Dark Ritual, Collective Brutality, you can pitch 2 cards, or 1 card, depending on what they have. They have a Deathrite Shaman on the battlefield. You pitch 2 cards. Because you get 1 cast normally, you get 1 mode normally, and then you get the 2 additional modes for each card you discard. So in this case, like if they had a Deathrite Shaman, you go Collective Brutality, discard a creature and something else. You would give the Deathrite Shaman -2/-2. You would drain them for 2, and you'd also look at their hand and take like a counter spell from it or some sort of graveyard interaction from it if it's an instant or sorcery. So, but that's turn 1 only with if you have a Lotus Petal and a land, or a Lotus Petal, a land, and a Simian Spirit Guide, or a land and a Simian Spirit Guide that the land has to tap for black. You can do this. It's just a matter of putting those puzzle pieces together to figure out how to get everything in the graveyard on turn 1. So I think that pretty much covers it. I'm going to remove all these because this is the actual deck that I was playing. Move all those over. So yeah, if you have any questions, leave comments. I will be talking to anybody that's playing this in person, so that'll be a little bit different, where him and I can have that face-to-face interaction. He just hasn't ever played Legacy before, so this is the way to kind of educate him on how to play this deck. This deck has very few decision lines. It's, look at my opponent's hand, am I clear to go for reanimation, yes or no, or you just shove all in and say, hey, I'm just going to reanimate, and if they stop me, they stop me. This deck doesn't really worry about the interaction game. You're just trying to do your own thing. It's a combo deck. If they stop you, there's a very high likelihood that you're probably going to lose, because you use a lot of resources to get 1 creature on the battlefield very early, because those creatures are usually very expensive. So yeah, this is basically the deck. Those are the cards you have to watch out for. So hopefully this helps. Thanks.